From a public health perspective, hospitals have always had a sacred context because both sides needed them in any conflict, and hospitals and physicians, nurses, healthcare professionals are oath-driven to respond to a need in front of them, no matter who that is. And that's not a secondary oath, it's not a sorta oath, it is the core of the Hippocratic Oath. And every physician I have ever worked with would never deny care or help to an individual who's in front of them. They'll put barriers up to accessing them, but once in front of them, the response is guaranteed. And that has to be the way it stays.
Welcome to the Global Health Diplomats. We've taken over a Shot in the Arm podcast space here in Harare. He's Eric Gooseby, the nice one.
And he's Ben Plumley, the English one. Sorry about that.
No, it's entirely appropriate, Eric.
Okay.
Really good to see you here in Harare.
And you?
You had quite the trip getting here, right?
Yeah, I did. Kind of the best laid plans, but had a little baggage loss that we're still trying to find. So I was telling people that Zimbabwe has done this to me 3 times, and that Harare leg.
Oh,
so I'm optimistic, but so it goes.
Well, you look as fresh as a daisy.
Well,
so.
Thanks. This is 2-day-old clothing, and that's the truth. So here we are. So pardon the aromas.
Oh, there are none whatsoever. And of course,
Yeah.
we don't have, Snifferama audio.
No.
So anyway, rapidly moving on. We're doing an emergency podcast.
Yes.
We've had really quite an amazing number of requests from viewers and listeners to talk about the global health diplomacy implications of what's going on in the world. Obviously, conflict, and particularly the situation in the Middle East. You and I, in an earlier episode, spoke about the impact of the targeting of healthcare facilities in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and definitely want to come back to that. Of course, we've got COP28 taking place as we speak, and they actually had a health day, not that anyone noticed. So want to touch on that. And then, given that we are in Zimbabwe, a country that's very close to both of our hearts, even if you lose luggage, I never have, by the way. It's always come through with me.
English luck.
Isn't it? Right. Just how we see things from the HIV perspective playing out here. So a bit of a few things to cover. So kicking off first, someone said to me that we ought to be addressing the use of hospitals as weapons of war. And that's I don't know how necessarily helpful that is as a sort of a way to enter an informed conversation about what's happening. But I do think it captures the spirit of the moment. And I just wonder at top level, how are you feeling about what is happening in the Middle East and what continues to happen in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, Ben, I'm deeply saddened by what has happened in both the Ukraine and the Middle East. The Middle East evolution since October 7th, horrendous start to that war. No one could conceive of the type of atrocities that were performed repeatedly on 1,400 people that started a rampage that continued, but the response to it is of great concern to the global community now. And I think it has stepped into a measure of proportionate versus disproportionate response. And it has, I think, displayed how cheap life really is on the planet. And that is the part that has saddened me the most. People are collateral damage, and that seems to be okay with the powers that be. And I don't understand how we kind of got here, to be quite honest with you. From a public health perspective, hospitals have always had a sacred context because both sides needed them in any conflict, and hospitals and physicians, nurses, healthcare professionals are oath-driven to respond to a need in front of them, no matter who that is. And that's not a secondary oath. It's not a sort of oath. It is the core of the Hippocratic Oath. And every physician I have ever worked with would never deny care or help to an individual who's in front of them. They'll put barriers up to accessing them, but once in front of them, the response is guaranteed. And that has to be the way it stays. This has challenged all of that, and I think we need to acknowledge the difficulty in the dynamic of a hospital as a site where control and command is actually occurring. If it is occurring there, it needs to be displayed and shown in no uncertain terms because it's such a critical claim. If there is indeed that kind of compartmentalization of their effort in a hospital complex, pictures and video needs to be out to prove it. A few machine guns and ammunition does not show that. And I think our Israeli colleagues need to come clean with that kind of display of what they have found, and what they say is there needs to now come forward. But further than that, the inability of both sides of a conflict to not access healthcare has always made any healthcare a reasonable destination, and has been the power of healthcare in being a third leg on a stool in conflict situations. They often allow for and are the conduit through which peace discussions emit, and that is being taken away completely.
So I have been sitting in on a number of the WHO and UN press conferences that have happened since the events of October the 7th. And I was really struck, and this resonates with a comment or reflects a comment that you made, that the WHO really pushed back on certain parts of the US media saying, well, look, no, there isn't adequate evidence to show that Hamas has been using the tunnels beneath hospitals, or indeed part of the hospital facilities themselves, as control and command centers for their military campaign. And I was surprised that comment was made quite as assertively as it was, because in sort of classic intelligence gathering ways, and of course that's not the same as producing clinical evidence. I think there has been, and we've heard it from the UK, we've heard it from the Europeans, we've heard it from the US as well as the Israelis, and occasionally even the Palestinian Authority, that there was the use of health facilities as shields for military action. So that makes things extremely complicated. Now, I'm not saying that therefore gives carte blanche to then go in, treat a medical facility as if it is any other collateral space. There is a dignity and a deepened sense of responsibility for precisely the reasons you raise that mean that hospital facilities have to be treated exceptionally well, and particularly if you've got people injured, people being cared for non-combat related conditions. If you are planning to undertake an operation against that facility, have such a heightened degree of responsibility. And, some of my Israeli friends say, well, of course, Hamas did not show the same kind of concern when it, caused such abominable disruption and death on October the 7th. Yes. But again, it's a question of, well, if life is valuable, both sides are valuable, and we have to find a way of getting to a point where we think after the violence. And if we are basically razing Gaza to the ground, are we not? We may potentially eliminate Hamas, but we will likely be creating Hamas 2, or perhaps even more extreme versions of Hamas. And surely the objective here is for, I would describe it a two-state solution, but a way in which Palestinians and Israelis can start the process of trying to live together. And I do think that health facilities play a key role in that, because, again, to your point, a Palestinian coming into an Israeli facility, an Israeli coming into a Palestinian facility, the doctor treats them regardless of creed, color, or persuasion.
Excuse me, Ben, but I just violently agree with you on this and feel it needs to be emphasized. Hospitals should be sacred ground, and they should be open to whoever comes in through the door, not discriminating or taking a side in who they are or not going to respond to and give care to. When that is the case, for a hospital to be used as a barrier to preclude an attack on a control and command center, that is a transgression, but the response is not to total the hospital. The response is to strategically, surgically go in and get the bad guys and remove them, at the same time preserve the capability that the hospital represents or created elsewhere. But that has got to occur, and that has not been allowed to occur because of the conflagration of weapons that come in and around the area. None of that type of discussion is happening. And it's tragic, but I want to say we have moved away from the way we were, is for a better way to say it. This was not the case that people would abandon those principles where their regard for just hospitals and healthcare workers was high enough on both sides that they saw them as a resource that would be non-judgmental and responsive to their needs. And when hospitals do that, the community knows that immediately. MSF is a wonderful example of that. Time after time, they show up and deliver the health care that's needed in that moment on both sides of a conflict. And I feel that we have lost our way with this one in a big way.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, just one final comment on it from my side is I am a strong supporter of the state of Israel. I describe myself as a socialist Zionist, and that's got a very specific sort of late 19th century definition of after the end of the Ottoman Empire, that there would be a state where Jews, Christians, and Muslims could live together.
That's the vision.
That's right. And that there would be a place for Jewish people, who many of whom were already there, to be able to come together and have their nation after 2,000 years. Of course, the British screwed it up, as they tend to do, through the Balfour Declaration that wasn't honored. And so Israel came into being in this crucible of fire in the mid-1940s, and it has been tough ever since. But I would say that all of this seems to me to be a failure on the Netanyahu government side. This idea of controlling Hamas and thinking that you weaken them enough so that nothing has to change and you can expand settlements. This has shown what an absolute immoral, disgraceful failure that policy has been.
It has been. It has been. And I think that the Israel parliament, the Knesset, will look at this and really evaluate whether or not there was an understanding of the attack on October 7th that should have been responded to and prepared for differently or not. But I do believe that Netanyahu is really in need of an evaluation of his ability to move this forward from here on. The ability to find a win for Israel and for Palestine is still on the table. It is not intellectually that difficult to think of how we could make a situation where both individuals can thrive and that their families can thrive living in the same proximity. They were doing it before, they could do it again, and I believe there needs to be a global will to make that happen. If not, I think that the response that we will annihilate and destroy, just as you've said, will result in a revenge cycle that will never stop. And we've seen that over and over again. Why we think this will be any different, we don't. So I really agree with you.
And I suppose it also takes us up the road a little bit to Eastern Europe and the front lines of Ukraine. When we last spoke, we expressed our absolute abhorrence at the way in which the Putin regime had targeted Ukrainian health facilities. And we were also really chuffed and impressed at the way that particularly the HIV community had come in, all those investments that you particularly had led in Ukraine through the Alliance for Public Health, mobile clinics, filling in where health facilities had been destroyed. And do you think, even though we're at a point where it looks like it's a bit of a standstill in the war, but do you think we are at a point where Putin's attempt to destroy health facilities as a way of demoralizing the population has failed?
I think it has failed. I shudder to think that it was an actual strategy that President Putin was actually implementing to target and, kind of destroy facilities that are really part of the greater good resource that Ukraine needs to cherish and hold and not let dissolve during this time of conflict. The ability to do that is going to be hard enough with the Ukraine government. The kind of institutionalization of corruption is present in that government and has been for many, many years, and makes it difficult to deliver aid and have the aid go where it needs to go. And those types of concerns have rose up in the U.S. legislature as game-stopping reasons to not put resources forward. And the conversation truly has shifted to, we don't think we should do this anymore in the House. The Senate is clear, but the House has now a cadre of people that are still minority that are saying that for the first time. So there's work to be done. Ukraine needs the support that the United States saw and delivered initially in the billions of dollars, the hundreds of billions of dollar range, and that needs to sustain itself, or it too will degenerate into a festering conflict that will not identify a clear winner for months to a year or two. Is the people who watch these signals really feel strongly this is a long haul and that Russia will eventually win. So if this is indeed the future that we're looking at, those realities need to be incorporated in the thinking now.
Just sort of feels to me as a modern version of Lenin's Useful Idiots. That small group of folk that are in the House of Representatives pushing this. Well, there's one more.
Easy stuff,
The easy stuff. Well, talking of disruption and chaos in the House of Representatives, shall we talk about PEPFAR?
Yes, we should.
What the bloody hell is going on?
So, an effort that started in 2003 from President Bush's vision that there was this unmet need that needed to be met, deployed really resources in an extraordinarily generous way to target countries that were most impacted by HIV and TB, which the program represents, for diagnosis and treatment of HIV in the short and long term, for a prevention strategy and a therapeutic strategy that was evolved in the public health delivery system of the countries engaged. 25 million lives saved, 5.5 million babies born of HIV-positive mothers who are HIV-negative themselves. And we really have somewhere around 27 million people on antiretroviral therapy through that program, all of which is the best reflection of soft power that the planet could conjure up. And it's in that PEPFAR format that it's being delivered. And I think the United States' commitment to soft power has wavered a bit in this current discussion, but needs to come forward again, because we do not do anything else, and we only have on the other side of the equation now hard power investments. And I think the American people, the taxpayers that are paying the budget for PEPFAR after 25 years, feel strong about those resources continuing to be a soft power reflection. That conversation needs to permeate now in the House. The White House needs to get more committed and spearhead that discussion. There needs to be reach out from prior presidents. President Bush, President Clinton are both getting on the phone to talk to their constituencies in the House and the Senate that need to come to the table and make a decision and support it. The Congressional Black Caucus is rising up once again to support this as a central focal point. And I do believe that our emeritus Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, realizes that we miss her in her cadence and her drumbeat for reauthorization. So she's going to try to come in and support as best she can. We'll need all of that and more.
And more. Did you read Steve Morrison's CSIS blog about the need for a new realism? I got to say, I think Steve is a brilliant thinker, and he captured in a very pithy blog, and we'll attach it in the show notes, what so many of us have had bits and pieces of, but his call on us to accept the fact that we need this new realism, that we will probably have to deal with annual appropriations rather than and admittedly, it always...
Tragedy. I mean, for all the public health planning that you can do in a 5-year time frame versus a 1-year time frame, it destroys your ability to plan and invest and look at the outcome that it created. It takes 3 years to see anything. You fund something in year 1, you don't see what it does until year 3. That's if everything goes well as you've planned it. So we are really making a mistake to move to a 1-year reauthorization. It will diminish the impact of the program.
So I guess the gloves are still off, the fight is still on. How do you think this is going to play out if you were to look into your crystal ball?
I think, I hope that the rally that we're seeing in the House and institutions and in factions in the House that have historically supported reauthorization and PEPFAR reemerge and being energized, being strategic and aggressive in putting their position out. The community in the United States and globally for PEPFAR need to be part of this discussion. What would help would be if African leaders in countries that have for many years benefited from the investment by the U.S. tax dollar, the lives that are saved, the husbands, wives, daughters, and sons, and children of people have been saved by that. That still counts. I want people to remember that and to come forward with, we do not want this to stop. This is, as I was saying, the best reflection of the United States soft power agenda, or stop talking about it, because if you get rid of this, you pretty much eliminate the portfolio. And I believe it's a strategic mistake. So my hope and thought is that that discussion in the House will be successful, the Senate will support it, and will really go back to a 5-year reauthorization, even if the House puts it up for a 1 year. That's what I really think will happen. What needs to secure that is NSC and White House direct comments that they want that to happen.
Now, again, you're being exceptionally diplomatic on that last point. One of the things that I was so pleased Steve Morrison did was to call out what he saw as a failure on behalf of the administration to advocate for PEPFAR aggressively.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it a failure. It's true. It's a fact. So, hey, it's a fact. Count the number of times you've risen up and put yourself, put your vote down to show support. That has waned. But I do think that we as the opportunity is still there. We can't let it slip away. It's going to require a total kind of all of government in the United States awareness of this moment, or we will slip and miss it. But I'm still optimistic.
Well, I love your optimism. Sometimes a little hard to see.
Yeah.
So, third, I guess, and sort of final question, a bit more upbeat, I hope, to wrap up the podcast. Okay. Here we are in Harare. Both you and I have, in our pasts, been deeply involved in the Pangea Global AIDS Foundation, which has a very long legacy of work in Zimbabwe. And of course, when the central headquarters of Pangea closed, it was the Pangea Zimbabwe AIDS Trust that took forward the mission and thrives and flourishes today. So admittedly, you've just arrived without luggage, but how are you seeing Zimbabwe doing in terms of the AIDS response?
I think the global focus on HIV has diminished. And I think Zimbabwe is one place as well where the orchestration and rigor of orchestration of the rollout of the capability to test, diagnose, and treat for the duration of a lifetime system of care up and standing with procurement, distribution, et cetera, all keeping it there. That success has been, I think, dramatic and will be diminished when and if the embracing of HIV-positive people becomes obscured in agenda items that really have nothing to do with our ability to identify a person in care and treat them and save their life. That's still the game with HIV and with TB, and to do anything that becomes inadvertently or advertently a barrier for an individual who's positive to present themselves to a delivery system, it's tragic. And that person and their family around them will not benefit from the resources and interventions we already have available for them. So I am always upset when I see things that put that barrier in front of an individual's ability to walk in the door and to stay in the door.
And that speaks to the bigger problem of the reality is that so many people with HIV fall under the radar, and they fall under the radar because they are from marginalized populations, men who have sex with men, drug users, sex workers, vulnerable children, vulnerable girls and young women. And if we are excluding or persecuting those groups, we make it impossible for them to access services, access the care they would otherwise need, access information about how to stay safe from HIV. That, combined with the funding crunch around HIV services, really makes me wonder whether we truly have got this pandemic under control. And so I've been laughing a little cynically when people have said to me, yeah, we can end HIV, end AIDS as a global health a priority by 2030 if we do whatever it happens to be. Let me put you on the spot. We going to end AIDS by 2030?
No, we're not. And we have the threat of receding in the ground already won if we don't re-engage and potentiate our commitment to the next 5-year stretch. That means reinvigorating and holding elected officials, governments responsible for caring for the needs of their people, one of which is HIV and TB. To ignore that is a political transgression that needs to have a political response from the constituency in each country. That's a version of what occurred for the North-South move of antiretrovirals to become available that prepped PEPFAR, teed up PEPFAR to get passed. That energy is not here. We have moved into a period where I think life is cheap. And I believe the current events of our immediate time in the last few months has reinvigorated the threat to me much higher and bigger than I really had perceived it before.
Which I guess is why doing these podcasts and having the support of John C. Martin Foundation and our friend John is so important. I mean, I can't imagine what he would be thinking.
John's stomach would be turning on this one because it is so much the vision he always articulated from the first time I met him, that we have the ability to allow people to benefit from the science we already know. That was a motivator for him. And it saddened him to know that his technology and discoveries in the form of tenofovir in particular was not benefiting the largest cohort of individuals that needed it on the planet. And at the time, he went way out of his way to make that available as the backbone of the antiretroviral rollout in PEPFAR. In somewhere around 2011, it became, instead of D4T, tenofovir.
Well, I guess that's it for this emergency podcast. As the English would say, Eric, keep your pecker up.
Okay, that's great.
As in, we need your optimism and we need constructive ways of getting through this period. Just great to see you. Thanks for doing this. Well, that's it for this episode of the Global Health Diplomats. Thank you to the nice one, Eric Gooseby.
Thank you to our English colleague.
Very diplomatic. And thanks also to the John Martin Foundation for their support for this podcast. Thanks also to FilmZim, who are recording this, producing and directing this from Harare, Zimbabwe. Really appreciate everything you're doing for us. Thanks to Eric Espera from NewsDoc Media. Thanks also to Waisha Raphael, our production coordinator. And of course, thanks to the Global Listening Project. We are a project of the Global Listening Project. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.